This past Father's Day, I received 3 copies of Deacon Greg Kandra's book, A Deacon Prays, from different people. I think everybody knows, well, he's going to be a deacon. I should probably get him something deacon-y, and this book just came out, so it'll do. It's a beautiful book. I really recommend you getting it. I'm not a deacon, and I'm still blessed by many of the prayers that are in this book. And it made me think, I'd love to talk to this guy and hear more about it. And I did. And it was amazing. It's the interview you're about to hear. I actually only looked at his bio after I invited him, and I didn't realize the depth of experience he had as a news producer, as a journalist, as a writer. He worked on the Saturday, the CBS Evening News, 60 Minutes 2, and he was a part of a documentary on 9/11. By God's providence, we're actually coming up to the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And that was a moment, as you will hear, that was profound for Deacon Greg. And it was actually through that tragedy that the Lord drew Greg closer to his heart and invited him to be a deacon. God's timing is always perfect. So as we come upon this anniversary of 9/11, our prayers for all the lives that were lost, both in that moment and the following things that unfolded from it, all those who may be still mourning losses from those that they knew in that time, and a prayer for our country, that we would be united and respond as we did back then in faith and in prayer. And I'm sure many of those things will come to the surface as you get to hear the moving word and witness of Deacon Greg Kandra. You'll be able to find out more about Deacon Greg, and I know you'll want to after this interview, on his website, thedeaconsbench.com. There's no apostrophe, just thedeaconsbench.com. You are listening to Speaking with Deacons, and I'm Bob Rice.
Exalt, let them exalt the host.
Receive the gospel of Christ, whose herald you have become. Believe what you read, teach what you believe, put into practice what you teach.
Welcome, Deacon Greg Kandra, to the show. It is such a blessing that you were able to take some time to talk with me and help me as I prepare for my own diaconate formation. As I mentioned earlier, I got, for Father's Day, I got 3 copies of your book, A Deacon Prays. I took that as a sign that I should probably at least read one of them. Since then, I've given the other 2 away to deacons. And I've just been really blessed by it, and just very grateful that you were able to take some time to talk with me today.
Oh, good. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So, hey, could you just share with me a little bit of your story? I mean, I read the bio in the back of the book. It sounds pretty fun. Being in journalism, news, lots of exciting things. But I'm really interested to know how you heard the call to be a deacon.
Well, it's an interesting story, and as I like to tell people, it really grew out of my experience of 9/11. When I was working for CBS and spending hours and hours and hours and days covering this story, being in the middle of it. The first 24 hours were sobering and very eye-opening. And I'd had a great career. I'd been at CBS at that time for, almost 20 years. And I had done everything. I had achieved everything that I had wanted to. And I had a great job.
Is that what you always wanted to do growing up, just be in the news?
Yeah, I wanted to be a writer. And I sort of fell into television news. I was hired by CBS in the winter of 1982, about 6 months after I graduated from college. And it was the height of the last recession, the big Reagan recession, when it was 9 and 10% unemployment. Newspapers were folding. I couldn't get a job in journalism or in newspapers to save my life. And my parents happened to be at a dinner party one night with a woman that my mother worked with. She was a dietitian at a private school. And the woman she worked with happened to be married to a producer from CBS. And my father, the world's greatest salesman, asked him, do you have any jobs? I've got this kid who's just out of college and he's got a background in journalism and he can't find a job. Do you have anything at CBS for him? Which seems like an outrageous question to be asking somebody. And as a matter of fact, he did. And he said, why don't you have him come by the office? So I did. I went down. I got dressed up in a coat and tie and went down to DuPont Circle, 2020 M Street, the Washington Bureau, gave them my resume. I took a typing test, did a whole series of interviews, and they hired me as a production secretary, which was basically typing and answering the phone, which is not exactly what I was hoping to do as a new journalism grad, but I figured, okay,
You got to start somewhere.
This will keep me busy for a little while. And I really came to enjoy it. I love the people I worked with. This was really the height of the last golden age of television journalism. Dan Rather was #1 in the ratings. CBS was #1. It was a great time to be there. And I learned from a lot of amazing people and got to meet.
It's hard to remember a time when everybody just watched the news at like 6 o'clock.
Yeah. People
and that was the only news you got.
People came home at turned on the news at 6:30, and like half of America tuned in to watch the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather. It was incredible. So anyway, I worked for CBS for a number of years, and eventually I took a writing test and became a writer in radio, and they moved me to New York. I got married in 1986 to my high school sweetheart, and she came with me, and we launched...
Always good. The wife comes with you.
Launched a new life in New York, and I went from writing for radio to writing for television. And in 2001, when 9/11 happened, I was a writer and producer for 60 Minutes 2, which was the spinoff of 60 Minutes. It was on for 4 or 5 years. And right after the towers fell, I got the phone call and said, "We need you in the newsroom." I worked at a building across the street from the main broadcast center. So I went over and spent, I guess, 12 or 13 hours writing news updates on the hour. We never went off the air until about 1 o'clock the next morning. And we worked, I think, 8 or 10 days without stop. And I had 12-hour shifts, and it was very intense and very hard and very painful because you heard a lot of horrible stories, and it was heartbreaking. And being in New York at that time was really hard. We live in Queens, and we would see flyers tacked to bus stops and lampposts saying, "Have you seen this person missing? Please call us. We love you. Come home." People who had been lost. And it really hit me hard that I realized that everything I had could be gone in a heartbeat, and how fleeting life is. So I began thinking more seriously about my faith. I was a cradle Catholic and had been to Catholic school and all of that. And for a while, when I was in high school, I considered becoming a priest, but eventually dating and girls got in the way, and I followed my career into journalism. So I found my way back more seriously to my faith and considered for a while becoming a Benedictine oblate or a lay Cistercian. I discovered the writings of Thomas Merton, fell in love with it, and began making some retreats to a Trappist monastery in Georgia, which I highly recommend. It's the Monastery of the Holy Spirit outside of Atlanta. I got to know a number of the monks down there and started regularly.
Is that a silent community? Are Trappists usually like no talking?
They talk. They can be very chatty. They don't talk that much. They're not like a lot of monastic orders, the Franciscans or the Benedictines. They do have a lot to do with the outside world.
Sure.
But they do have a cloister, and they're closed off. I was really captivated by their spirituality and their charism, and loved my time down there. And they invited me to be a facilitator for what they called a lay Cistercian encounter, which was a gathering of lay Cistercians from all over the world. And the Abbot General was going to be there, and about 100 other people. So I said, okay, I don't know what a facilitator does, but I'll go there and basically, make sure that people attend all the conferences and whatnot, and see if I can learn a few things along the way. One of the people who happened to be there was a deacon from England, Wayne Bodkin, I'll never forget. And when he got up, I got to chat with him a little bit. He got up and preached at one of the liturgies in 3 languages, English, French, and Spanish. And he was a young guy, I'm going to say late 30s. And it was like the top of my head just flew off, and something said to me, that's what you should be doing. So I had lunch with him after the liturgy, and he told me that he worked for the BBC in England, and he had a background in journalism and in broadcasting. It turned out we knew a lot of the same people because CBS and the BBC had a relationship. And I thought, this is just too freaky. And I told him, what was it like being a deacon? I really didn't know any deacons at the time. This was something brand new to me. And I said, maybe I should consider becoming a deacon. And he said, oh, you should. You'd be great. You'd be great. You should be a deacon. So I went home from that experience. This was in the spring of 2002, April of 2002. Okay. And said to my wife, guess what? I'm going to be a deacon. And she said, you don't know what you're talking about. You're crazy. So she said, okay, why don't we put this on the back burner and you can think about it for a while. And this is really something you could do after you're retired. You don't have to do this now. And I said, you're right. So we put it on the back burner, and I decided I would wait a while. But as soon as I decided to do that, suddenly I was being inundated by deacons and deacon things. Every time I turned around, for no reason at all, I was reading articles or seeing interviews with deacons on television. And
is it kind of like the blue Honda thing, like whenever you buy like a new car, you suddenly see your new car everywhere. It's like it's in your mind. It's just now they've always been there, but they just appear. That kind of thing.
It was a little bit more freaky than that. The real turning point was when I went out one Saturday. This was 3 or 4 weeks after my experience down in Georgia. I went out one Saturday to run some errands, and I went to a diner to have breakfast. Well, the place I would normally go to that was near our apartment was packed. There were no tables available. So I walked a couple of blocks and went to another diner, and there was lots of seats available. So as I walked in, I saw there was a stack of penny newspapers, advertisers stacked on the floor. So I picked one up and went over to the counter to sit down and read and order my eggs. And I opened the paper, and there was a 2-page spread in this cheap Queens newspaper about deacons in the Catholic Church and how the Catholic Church needs more deacons, and deacons are going to be doing more things in the Catholic Church. And I went, it was God just took a 2x4 and bashed me over the head, and he said, "You idiot." So I was sitting there reading this and realizing the circumstances that had brought me to that moment, and tears came to my eyes, and I thought, I've got to do something about this. So I went back and talked more with my wife, and she said, okay, let's do this. So I met with my pastor, and he contacted the diaconate office, and they said, well, if he wants to be in the next class, which is starting this fall, he has to apply like yesterday. The deadline has just passed. But we're going to fax you the material and fill out the forms and get everything to us, and we'll worry about his transcripts and all that other good stuff later. Just get the paperwork in, and we'll take it from there. And to make a short story long, I ended up being in that fall's aspirancy class. And 5 years later, I was ordained in 2007. It was probably the shortest discernment period on record, going from someone who didn't know any deacons and didn't know much about deacons to being ordained and being admitted to the class in a very, very short period of time. And it was the apostles had a pretty short discernment moment too. Just drop your nets and follow me. That seems, we don't need a year to do that kind of nonsense. We'll just dive right into it. Tell me a little bit about the class. So this was the Diocese of Brooklyn, right? Yes. Archdiocese of Brooklyn. Diocese of Brooklyn.
Right.
Brooklyn is the largest diocese in the country that is not an archdiocese. We've got almost 2 million people, and I forget what percentage of them are Catholic, a significant number. It's considered to be the diocese of immigrants, although I think now probably Los Angeles is probably taking that crown. And there are more immigrants coming from that side of the world than Brooklyn. But originally, back at the turn of the last century, everybody came through Ellis Island, and a lot of them ended up in Brooklyn. So in Brooklyn is also the only completely urban diocese in the United States. So what this means is that every few blocks there's a Catholic church. So, the Germans would have their Catholic Church, and the Italians, and the Poles, and the Irish, and on and on and on. Now, so many of those groups have assimilated, a lot of those places have closed, or they've been taken over by the Chinese or the Vietnamese or the Filipinos. So, but we're still a big immigrant population, and I think Mass is said in 23 different languages in the diocese, in different parishes.
Wow.
We've got about 200 parishes. So
Now, did you have any background in theology before this?
Absolutely
were you just kind of
not.
come into this? Okay.
I would.
Yeah. So tell me.
I
go
would
ahead.
read Magnificat. That was about it.
What were some of the things that stood out in your formation as you got ready to be a deacon?
Well, the formation that we had was very, I would say, rudimentary. It wasn't very sophisticated. We had guys who had postgraduate degrees. We had lawyers. We had doctors. But we also had guys who didn't even graduate high school. And you had guys who English was not their first language. So you had to create an academic program that could cut through all of that and be able to reach all of those people. So a lot of what they did, and we had very good teachers and studied all the usual things, church history and moral theology and a little bit of canon law, but it was sort of a basic introduction to everything and then giving you the resources to get more information if you needed it. That was basically the philosophy. I was fascinated by church history, which was one of the first classes that we had. We had that across 2 semesters. And just getting into the life of being an active member of my parish. When I began formation, I had been an usher and a lector and a Eucharistic minister, but getting to work more closely with the priests and the people. And when I was in formation, I attended Mass almost every morning and served Mass as the altar boy at the altar and would be the lector at the 8 a.m. Mass. And just becoming acclimated to all of that was miraculous and a joy, and it's something I still love to do. A couple of weeks ago, one of the priests in the parish asked me if I would preach the homily at his Mass. And he said, I know you're going to be serving and preaching at one of the other Masses. He said, you can just come on and do the homily and leave. And I said, no. I want to be in for a penny, in for a pound. I'm going to do the whole thing. And there's nothing I love more than being able to be on the altar and to serve Mass and to be a part of that. And we have beautiful liturgies at my parish, which enhances everything too. But I just love being a part of that, being a part of the life of the church and being able to share that enthusiasm and that love with the people is, I think, a gift, something I'm privileged to do.
You mentioned earlier that in your own career, you were able to accomplish so many of the things that you had hoped for. And it sounds like the diaconate was a out of left field thing from the Lord, not anything you ever planned on doing. But how has that compared to the things you've done before? How has it changed your life? How have you seen those graces work in what you get to do now?
Well, it's funny because when I decided to do this, and I had a lot of ambivalence about going into the diaconate because I knew it was going to be very time-consuming. I was not the world's greatest student. I hated going to school, which I'm speaking to a teacher here, and you probably are horrified. But
no, dude, I actually never intended to graduate college, but that's a whole nother story. I'm totally. It is God's sense of humor that I'm doing.
As I said in my first homily at my Mass of Thanksgiving, if you want to hear God laugh, tell him your plans.
Yeah.
But I really, I was very apprehensive about going back to the classroom and being in class again. And once I got over that fear and sort of started getting used to being a part of the life of the parish and sharing all of that, I've told people CBS is not exactly the farm team for Catholic clergy. And a lot of people have asked me, well, how did they react when you told them that you were going to be a deacon? I mean, was this a lot of people have wondered if I was experienced any bigotry or prejudice or anti-church attitudes or anything. And I have to say no. people were tremendously supportive. And in fact,
great.
the executive producer of 60 Minutes wrote a recommendation for me.
That's cool.
Actually, what he said was, "You write it and I'll sign it." So, okay. But he himself is or he's not there anymore, but he was a baptized Catholic, and I think his father was Catholic and his mother was Protestant. I forget what, but and he's a very church-going kind of guy himself, and he attends an Episcopal church up in Connecticut. But I remember after a while, one of the first jobs that I had at CBS, I've had many of them, was I was the editor of Katie Couric's blog when she had just started at CBS. And she used to call me Father Greg, which I thought was cute. And she used to talk a little bit about her own experience. She went to the Red Brick Presbyterian Church in Manhattan when she went to church. And she had a very interesting relationship with religion and with faith. She was very curious about it and took it very seriously, as did most of the people I worked with. And what happened, I discovered, was because I was this ordained guy, I became the go-to person when people had questions about the church or anything that was going on in the church. They would ask me as if suddenly I was the expert, which I'm not. So, but I found people to be generally very respectful and appreciative. And one story that I like to tell, which some people find shocking, was Ash Wednesday when I was working at CBS. I came in and I brought ashes with me in a little container. And I sent around an email to people saying, "It's Ash Wednesday," out to about 100 people. "It's Ash Wednesday. I have ashes. If you'd like to get ashes, I'm going to be in this particular office between 12 and 1 and stop by." And there were about 30 people who came by, including the president of CBS News, Sean McManus, who received ashes, and nobody made much of a fuss about it. It was just something they thought was a cool thing to be able to do. And I was able to do it. So
That's awesome. My experience in New York, and I haven't had a ton of it, is that it's a pretty religious town. It's a pretty strong Catholic town. I think maybe it's that immigrant vibe, but there's a lot of respect for other people just by the nature of the dynamic of the city. I don't know what it's like today, post-COVID.
Yeah, we all have to get along.
Yeah.
And a lot of people crammed into a small amount of space, and you learn how to get along with one another and respect one another and give one another space.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Hey, tell me a little bit about your wife, if you wouldn't mind. It's part of the thing I ask a lot of folks on the show about, because I'm curious to see how the Lord will involve my wife in ministry. And it sounds like everyone's got a very different story, but are there ways that your wife is involved in the ministry that you get to do?
It's very funny because when there was all this discussion about women deacons, a lot of people in the parish would say, "So, Siobhan," that's my wife's name, "Siobhan, do you want to be a deacon?" I said, "Oh, no." So that's Greg's thing. That's not my thing. She prefers to sort of be in the background. But she began her career as an actress and did a lot of regional theater and community theater and things like that, even up till I began my formation. And then she decided to take a break from that because she decided, as a deacon's wife, all she's going to be able to do are productions of The Sound of Music. So, but she is, as I like to say, she
could probably do Godspell.
That's another one. That's another
that might
one.
Be allowed.
Maybe Fiddler on the Roof.
Maybe.
But I like to tell people she is now the world's greatest lector, which is true. She's wonderful. In fact, we're doing a workshop on lecturing for a parish in New Jersey next month. But one of the things that we do that is really very special that we're able to do together every Lent, we do the Way of the Cross, and we do Mary's Way of the Cross, which if you haven't read it or seen it, it's really beautiful. My wife discovered it on a pilgrimage to Medjugorje. They did it. And at each station there is a reflection by Mary, what she was thinking at that moment. So what we do at my parish is my wife reads that reflection, and then I go from station to station with the altar servers, and we have music in between the Stabat Mater, and it's absolutely beautiful.
Sounds
and
amazing.
They do a beautiful job of it at my parish. We have, I kid you not, on a typical Friday during Lent, we'll get 200 or 300 people. the turnout for Stations of the Cross, and the altar servers get involved. It is a full experience, and then we conclude with benediction. But it's really something beautiful.
Yeah,
So
that sounds amazing, and I love how just it's about using your gifts and your passions and finding a way to have that give.
Yeah,
glory to
and
God. That really sounds incredible.
Every couple is different. Every deacon and his wife is different, as you've discovered. There are wives who are very, very involved in their parish, and there are wives who aren't. And it's nice to have that freedom. The wives, when I was in formation, I don't know how it is with you, but when I was in formation, the wives did not have to attend all the classes. There were a handful of them that they had to do, and they had to go on retreats with us. And of course, they have to give their written consent before ordination. But they could be as engaged or as disengaged as they wanted. And I know that's not true, that there are other places around the country where the wives are much more involved, and it's really expected of them that they be involved. So,
yeah, it is pretty different in various places. Did you end up at your home parish?
I did.
After ordination? Okay.
I did. My class was the first one where, when we began formation, we were told in no uncertain terms, you might not end up at your parish. And that had
that's what I was told.
You had to agree to that. And we did not have a deacon at my parish. It's a big, busy parish. We've got about 2,500 families. We have 3 priests, one of whom is a bishop and one of the auxiliary bishops of Brooklyn. But they didn't have a deacon. And we have 4 masses.
How many languages in your parish?
Just one.
Is it just English speaking? Wow.
Just English, which is a rarity, I think, in Brooklyn. And our pastor is Hispanic. His name is Sanchez. Curiously, though, his father came from Spain, and they didn't speak Spanish when he was growing up. He didn't learn Spanish until he was in seminary. And everybody thinks, they must have a Spanish mass there. No, we don't.
Right.
And the fact is, we don't have a need for one. There's not a big Spanish community in the parish. So,
I was going to say, it sounds like a typical church bureaucracy to send a Spanish-speaking priest to an English-only parish.
What are you going to do?
Other parishes are dying for Spanish-speaking priests. So at least that sounds like that worked out pretty well there.
Yeah.
And it's hard to believe, gosh, we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. I teach at a college, and I'm always just surprised at young people. I mean, a lot of them haven't been born. I'm talking about freshmen and sophomores. It doesn't seem like 20 years ago.
I've been invited to give a talk in the Diocese of Allentown. They're doing a special red, white, and blue mass to mark the anniversary, and it's really a tribute to the police, the firefighters, and the rescue workers. And they're having a mass and then a reception afterward, and they've asked me to give the keynote at the reception. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about is really we're now a generation later, and you have all these people who have no memory of that. But it's a story that we have to keep telling. We can't let this be forgotten, and we need to keep it alive. And it's really amazing to think of all the time that has gone by, because it seems like it was last week.
Yeah.
One of the big projects that I was involved in at CBS, and I think one of the reasons they asked me to do this, was the documentary 9/11 that was hosted on CBS by Robert De Niro. And it's, I don't know if you saw it or you may have heard about it, but it was shot by a couple of French filmmakers. They came to New York and they decided to do a documentary about a probie, which is a young firefighter who was on probation in a firehouse. They were going to follow him around for a couple of months and then tell his story. Well, he turned out to be at the firehouse that was almost literally next door to the World Trade Center. So what had started out as a story about this kid became a story about the entire firehouse and their experience of 9/11. And it's an extraordinary. I've told people that 9/11 and that documentary is going to be in the first line of my obituary, because it was such an important testament, and to this day I think is a piece of history that people are going to be looking back on forever, documenting what it was like. Among other things, it has the only footage shot inside the World Trade Center right before the towers fell. it has the last footage of Father Michael Judge before he died. And just the sense of being there and being in the middle of it is extraordinary.
And I imagine, through the eyes of the faith that was awakening in you, that also just gave it a completely different perspective. I mean, you mentioned Father Judge, and one of the things when I think back on 9/11, and this always bugs me in movies, that obviously they don't put God in movies, right? That's just kind of not the Hollywood thing to do. But especially like whenever there's some huge world event, in real life, the churches are filled. I mean, I vividly remember the Sunday. I think 9/11 was on a Tuesday, if I remember correctly. And I just remember, people were just out the door on Sunday. The response of faith that came from so many Americans. And you talk about telling the story. I often think that, we can overlook, the fact of just how we do turn to God, in the midst of tragedy. Sadly, sometimes it takes tragedy to make us turn to God, but that story and that element and the sacrifice of Father Judge and so many others, so many religious sisters and priests, working so hard during that time. It really is a profound moment.
I do think that probably my particular story is not that unusual, and I think that there are probably a lot of vocations in one way or another that came out of the experience of 9/11. We experienced religion differently and experienced the church very differently, I think, in the days after that. And, New York is seen as this, sophisticated, cynical, unfriendly kind of a town. But, man, I remember walking home just a few days after the towers fell, and walking down 57th Street in the evening to get the subway to go back to Queens, and people were putting candles in windowsills and hanging flags, and it was extraordinary, the outpouring of emotion from people, and the city really came together in a very powerful, beautiful way.
Yeah, and a lot of that, the power of prayer. That might be a good segue to talk a little bit about the book that you wrote and the books that you've written. I noticed there are more books on prayer. This seems to be a passion of yours as you're writing. Tell me a bit more about what inspired you, not just for this book, but also, you have two other books that deal with prayer.
Yeah, The Busy Person's Guide to Prayer, and the other one is The Busy Person's Guide to an Extraordinary Life, which is kind of a sequel or a follow-up to that. But one of the things that the way all of this started was that an editor at Word Among Us Press contacted me and said, we'd like to see if you'd be interested in writing a book. And I was getting lots of inquiries from a lot of people to write a book, and I said, I don't have time, no. And she said, well, that's why you're the perfect person to do this book, because it's all about being too busy to pray. She said, one of the things that people ask us is, do you have any books for people who are too busy to pray? Something like The Busy Person's Guide to Prayer. And she said, well, no, we don't. So as fate would have it, they reached out to the busiest person they could find and said, what do you think about doing this? And the more we talked about it, the more I thought, maybe this is something that I could write about. And it was a great process, the writing of the book, and then that led me to these other books. But what I've really tried to do is demystify prayer a little bit and make people realize that it's not as hard as you think. It does require discipline and some effort, but it's really anything done with the right intention and with the right frame of mind can be a prayer and should be a prayer. And I think when St. Paul says, pray without ceasing, that's what he's talking about. Make your life and what you bring to your life and the things that you do in your life a prayer. And so these books are really designed to try and help people to do that. And the most recent book, A Deacon Prays, it's funny the reactions people have had to the title. It's just like, well, of course a deacon prays. Why wouldn't he pray? I said, no, that's not what I meant. It's really a deacon.
One would hope a deacon would pray.
It's a deacon praying, and some of the prayers that I have come up with. And this idea just occurred to me when I was shaving one morning, and I thought about all the things that were coming up during Holy Week and all the different things that a deacon does at that time of year. And I said, wouldn't it be interesting if there were prayers that a deacon could do? So from that, I pitched the idea to Ave Maria Press, and they said, that's a great idea. Can you come up with 100? Well, I don't know. Let me try. So that book is the result, and I'm very proud of it. It's really a labor of love, and it's really something that comes from the heart. It's a lot of prayers and reflections that a deacon can use in a variety of circumstances, at different moments in life, before a baptism, before preaching, before serving Mass, prayers for his family, on and on and on, trying to put into words things.
And I love the you mentioned the family, but the prayer for the spouse I find particularly beautiful.
Well, thank you.
I mean, they're all beautiful, but that one I've been praying every day. And for the listeners, it's you just have a line in there about being a deacon to your wife. And even just that simple phrase has really just made me go, oh, whoa, yeah, that's awesome, and yeah, it's borne really great fruit. So. Oh,
that's great. Thank you. So I hope it will inspire people and give them other ideas. There's a Way of the Cross for deacons. There's the Luminous Mysteries of the Rosary through a deacon's eyes.
That's my other favorite part about the book. Talk a little bit more about, and maybe to share with the listeners, in the book there's a beautiful reflection on the Luminous Mysteries and how each mystery ties into the life of the deacon.
Yeah, this was really sparked by my friend T.J. Burdick, who is a teacher and writer, and he had a presence on the internet. I don't know if he still has a blog or not, but he had sent me a reflection that he had written, just marveling at how the Luminous Mysteries in particular relate to the life and ministry of a deacon. And he thought it was very interesting that they were initiated by John Paul, and that really in the years following this, the diaconate really started to grow more and more and more. So I took that idea and I asked him, do you mind if I expand on that and do some reflections and actually do a rosary dedicated or from the perspective of a deacon? He said, no, go right ahead. So that's the result of that. And it looks at all the different things that deacons do and how that relates to the mysteries of that rosary, and how it really connects. It's almost like they were custom made for the deacon, because you have baptism, deacons do baptisms. You have the wedding feast at Cana, deacons do weddings. You have the institution of the Eucharist. Deacons serve at the altar and elevate the blood of Christ, and on and on and on. It's uncanny how closely they're connected to the ministry of a deacon. I think it can help us look at our ministry in a different way and look at the rosary maybe in a little bit different way.
Yeah, and even as someone who's not a deacon but preparing for it, I've really very much enjoyed reading those prayers, and I'm looking forward to using them. Because some of them are like before a baptism. Well, I haven't done that yet, but now I have a prayer. I did sing the Exultet once, so that'll probably be on the regular list of things that I get to do.
So you must be a singer.
Yes, yeah, I do. Actually, I lead some worship music on campus here at Franciscan University as well.
So that's great.
I get to teach catechetics, I do youth ministry, and I do music ministry. So I'm surprised at how many, as I've been looking at the history of the diaconate, how much singing is often involved in the life of the deacon. So,
you could probably chant the gospel. I'm not very good at that. I've tried it a couple of times and I gave up. But
depends on how long the gospel is. I remember one of our deacons who was just newly ordained. He tried to chant it, and it was a bad day to do it. It was like John chapter 6, the entire chapter. And even midway through, you could see him thinking, "Should I just stop chanting?" I mean, kids are screaming, and it's this. You could just know, it's that moment when he's like, "This was." But you got to finish, right? You just have to commit to it.
Just keep going
until you get to the end. Yeah, just
one of the most. You talk about chanting the Exultet. One of the most beautiful experiences I had a few years ago. I ended up going on a trip to Jordan. I should mention here that I work for Catholic Near East Welfare Association, which does a lot of work with the Eastern churches in the Middle East, Africa, India, and parts of Eastern Europe. And as part of that, I ended up going on a trip to Jordan, and it was right.
And is that picture on your website, the Deacon's Bench with the camel?
Yes, that's me, Petra.
So, and that was, so you got to go on the set of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Yes, that's exactly right.
That's awesome.
That's all people know it for.
That's right. There's no other significance than Harrison Ford and Sean Connery once over there. I'm sure something else happened, but who cares?
Anyway, we were there. It was right after we had celebrated Easter in this country. And Jordan is a country where all the churches, all the Christian churches, celebrate Easter at the same time. And they follow, I guess it's the Julian calendar, so they were a week after us. And we ended up going to the Easter Vigil at a Latin Rite Roman Catholic church in Amman, right as it was beginning. And the group of us just stood in the back. We didn't stay for the whole liturgy, but just for the beginning. And I heard the deacon chanting the Exultet in Arabic. And even now it brings tears to my eyes. It made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. It was exactly the same as what I had done the week before, but it was in Arabic. And I thought, this is the universal church.
Yeah.
That, we share this moment in the liturgy, and we're thousands of miles apart, but it's exactly the same, a little bit different.
Was it the same music?
Exactly the
Notes-wise?
same. Yeah.
Wow.
It was the same, chant melody. It was, and the interesting thing was he didn't do it a cappella. They had an organ accompanying him, which I'd never heard that before. But it was the exact same piece of music, but in a different language. It was beautiful.
Wow, that is so amazing. Yeah, I can't wait to have more of those experiences. Maybe I'll just end with this last question. As I'm preparing, sometimes I ask for advice, but maybe advice wouldn't be the right word. What was something that you thought you knew about the diaconate that once you became a deacon really surprised you? Like, what were some of those things that you were like, beyond your formation, beyond your mental preparation, just moments of being a deacon that really moved you? I mean, you mentioned one of them just now. But.
You really, flexibility is the key to everything. I tell people that I'm like Gumby. I'm very flexible. You have to be adaptable because things will not often go the way you think they will, whether it is in scheduling your life or in carrying out a liturgy. Be prepared for anything and everything, and be as adaptable as possible. I'm sure you've heard the hierarchy of values where number one is your marriage, number two is your job, and the diaconate is third. It never works out that way. Trust and believe. There's going to be a lot of rejiggering there. I often tell the story, my friend Leslie Stahl, when she was starting out in television, she was a White House correspondent for CBS, and she was also a wife and a mother. She had a young daughter. And she was something of a trailblazer in journalism. There weren't many women doing what she was doing. But another woman who had been successful in business and who was a wife and mother gave her some advice. And she said, Leslie, just remember, when you're juggling all those balls, remember which ones are rubber and which ones are glass. And I thought that's
a great piece of advice.
Yeah, and it's the same way in the diaconate. There's going to be balls that will bounce and balls that will break. And you just have to try and keep track of which is which and remember what's really important and most fragile and most precious. And take care of that and look after that. And, some things you can let drop and bounce and you'll figure it out later. But hold on to those most precious and most fragile ones.
Yeah. Amen. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. And, maybe you could close with a blessing. And I actually think we're probably going to release this around the time of 9/11. So if you want to include that in your prayer as well.
All right. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the grace of having this moment together. We ask you to be with us and to walk with us as we continue our journey through life. Animate our hearts and inflame our souls that we may always want to serve you and serve you better as faithful sons and daughters. And may we always strive to be deacons to one another, whether we are ordained or not. May we always seek to serve our brothers and sisters as we serve you, and always seek to see you in our brothers and sisters. And as we mark the anniversary of 9/11 and the tragic loss of that day, we ask you in a special way to hold in your arms all those who are hurting, all those who are remembering, all those who are grieving. And we ask that you bring us together and help heal whatever divides us, so that we may do glory to you and to your Son. And we ask this as we ask all things through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Deacon Greg. Really appreciate
Thank you.
you taking the time for us.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you all for listening to the show. I hope you were blessed by it. You can find out more about Deacon Greg on the deaconsbench.com. Is that right? .com?
That's right. Yep.
No apostrophe. Apostrophes don't work on the language of it, but the deaconsbench.com, where you can find out about his book, The Deacon Prays, other stuff he's written, and other things that he's doing. God bless.